Okay, so you want to run a steel mill, molten metal glowing orange as it pours into the caster, the roar of a 100-ton ladle tipping over, your name on the water tower outside a town that owes its whole existence to your furnaces. That's the romance of heavy industry, the last real thing business in an economy that mostly makes apps. Sounds simple, it is not. Here's what that image skips over. The mill that goes bankrupt while still producing steel every single day. The pension obligations dumped onto a federal insurance agency because the company that promised them collapsed first. The furnace that has to run 24 hours a day whether or not anyone wants to buy what comes out of it, because shutting it down and restarting it costs more than just losing money on it. And the fact that the price you can charge for your steel isn't really set by you, your costs, or even your customers. It's set by what happens on the other side of the planet, in a country you don't control, that isn't even trying to make money on the steel it sends you. Some mills make their owners rich. Some mills quietly bankrupt 3 or 4 owners in a row before getting torn down for scrap. And the difference between those two outcomes has almost nothing to do with how hard anybody worked. The first thing to understand is that steel mill describes at least 3 completely different businesses. An integrated mill runs blast furnaces and basic oxygen furnaces, turning raw iron ore and coking coal into steel from scratch. It's the classic image, the one Pittsburgh and Bethlehem were built on, and it is enormously expensive and enormously inflexible. Once you light a blast furnace, you basically can't turn it off without risking permanent damage to the furnace itself. An electric arc furnace mini mill, by contrast, melts down scrap steel using electricity instead of coke and iron ore. It's cheaper to build, faster to start and stop, and today accounts for over 70% of American steel production. Then there's the specialty tier, mills that make one narrow product, like grain-oriented electrical steel for transformers, or oil country tubular goods for drilling, where you're not really in the commodity steel business at all. You're in a niche with far less competition and far higher margins. An integrated mill and an EAF mini mill might both get called a steel mill, but one is a blast furnace fortress that can't easily be turned down, and the other is closer to a giant recycling plant with a furnace attached. You are not buying one business, you're buying a bet on which category you can survive in. Let's talk about what it actually costs to get in the door. Building an EAF mini mill from scratch runs somewhere around $300 to $500 per ton of annual capacity. Nucor's new sheet mill in West Virginia, sized at 3 million tons a year, was originally budgeted at $2.7 billion and has since climbed to $3.1 billion, with the company citing inflation, added property, and expanded port and rail requirements. An integrated blast furnace plant costs far more, often exceeding $1,500 per ton of capacity. When U.S. Steel announced its own new mini mill a few years back, it put the price at roughly $3 billion for 3 million tons of flat-rolled capacity, and that was considered the cheap way to add capacity compared to a traditional integrated build. Buying an existing mill is supposed to be the shortcut, and sometimes it is. In 2025, Nippon Steel completed its acquisition of U.S. Steel for approximately $15 billion, paying a serious premium for control of an iconic American producer. But existing mills can also be a trap, and there's no better illustration of that than Sparrows Point, outside Baltimore. In March 2008, Mittal Steel sold the plant to the Russian company Severstal for $810 million. 4 years later, in 2012, it was purchased along with several other mills by Ira Rennert's Renco Group for $1.2 billion as part of a package deal. The company running it, RG Steel, filed for bankruptcy that same year. When the plant went to liquidation auction just months later, the winning bid was $72 million. A steel mill that had sold for over $800 million 4 years earlier went out the door for less than a tenth of that. The price of an existing mill can evaporate faster than almost any other industrial asset in America, because the moment nobody wants to run it, the building is worth roughly what its scrap value is. Now assume you've bought or built the mill. Before you produce a ton of profitable steel, there's a layer of cost nobody puts in the brochure. If you buy an old integrated plant, you often inherit decades of environmental liability, contaminated soil and groundwater from a century of coke ovens and slag dumps, the kind of cleanup bill that outlives the company that caused it. You may inherit union pension and retiree healthcare obligations signed decades earlier under completely different market conditions. When Bethlehem Steel went bankrupt in 2001, it dumped its pension liabilities onto the Federal Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, specifically because carrying them made the company unsellable otherwise. Environmental control systems alone, the scrubbers, dust collection, and emissions monitoring required to legally operate a modern mill, can account for 10 to 15% of total project cost on a new build. An EAF mill needs a power purchase agreement, locking in enormous electricity supply, because melting a ton of scrap requires roughly 400 kilowatt hours, and if your rate isn't locked in, a spike in regional power prices can eat your margin before you've sold a single coil. You need rail spurs and port access, because moving thousands of tons of scrap in and finished steel out by truck alone doesn't work at scale. None of this shows up in the sticker price. All of it shows up in year one. Here's how the money actually comes in layers. First, base product sales. As of mid-2026, Nucor's hot-rolled coil spot price sits around $1,130 per short ton, with the broader steel mills segment averaging roughly $1,074 per ton across its product mix in the first quarter. Second, the metal margin, the spread between what you sell steel for and what you paid for the scrap that became it. Prime busheling scrap has been running around $400 per gross ton. When HRC trades near $1,100 and scrap costs $400, that few $100 spread per ton is where an EAF mill actually makes its money, not the sale price itself. Third, product mix. Plate and structural steel command higher prices per ton than basic sheet, so a mill's exact slate of products, not just its total tonnage, drives real profitability. Fourth, byproduct and brokerage revenue. Nucor runs its own scrap brokerage arm, DJJ, which buys and processes scrap not just for its own furnaces but for outside sale, turning a cost center into its own profit line. Fifth, specialty and government contracts, which can be worth far more per ton than commodity sales. Cleveland Cliffs was recently awarded a $400 million contract by the Department of War for grain-oriented electrical steel used in transformers and defense applications, product that never has to compete with a Chinese import at all. Which brings us to the one thing that makes this business fundamentally different from almost any other manufacturing business you could run. You do not set your own price. Steel is a global commodity, and the single largest force acting on that price is a country you have no relationship with and no leverage over. According to the OECD's Steel Outlook 2026, global steelmaking capacity has now risen for 7 straight years to a record 2.445 billion metric tons, while global demand has fallen for 4 straight years. That gap, global excess capacity, hit 640 million metric tons in 2025 and is projected to reach 745 million metric tons by 2028, more than double the entire steel output of every OECD country combined. Chinese steelmakers alone exported a record 131 million metric tons in 2025, up 153% since 2020, largely because domestic demand collapsed alongside China's property sector. And the OECD found the median Chinese steel firm received subsidies 15 times larger, relative to its assets, than producers anywhere else. You can run the most efficient, best-managed mill in America, and the price of your steel will still be set, in large part, by heavily subsidized overcapacity 10,000 miles away that has nothing to do with what American steel demand actually looks like. This is the myth the romance of the mill never tells you. You're not running a factory that sets its own price for its own product. You're running a factory whose price is decided by someone else's oversupply, and the only thing standing between you and that price is government trade policy. Sparrow's Point tells that whole story end to end. It opened in 1887, and by the mid-1950s, it was the largest steel mill on Earth, 5 square miles of furnaces employing 30,000 workers, producing steel for the George Washington Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge. Bethlehem Steel owned it for most of a century. Then imports rose, technology shifted toward oxygen furnaces and scrap recycling, and the mill's workforce shrank from 30,000 to 3,000 by the turn of the millennium. Bethlehem filed for bankruptcy in 2001, dumping its pension obligations onto federal insurance in the process. Over the next decade, the plant changed hands 5 times, sold for $810 million in 2008, bundled into a $1.2 billion deal in 2012, and finally auctioned for liquidation at $72 million that same year. It shut down completely, sat empty, was picked apart by scrappers, and was ultimately demolished. Today, the site is Amazon and Under Armour distribution warehouses. The largest steel mill in the world became a place that stores boxes. So who actually wants to own this business today? Domestic steel producers currently benefit from Section 232 tariffs holding at 50%, which have pushed total flat-rolled steel imports down 42% year over year, and given companies like Nucor genuine pricing power they haven't had in years, which is exactly why Nippon Steel was willing to pay $15 billion for US steel rather than simply build capacity elsewhere. For a strategic buyer, owning American steelmaking isn't primarily about the return on a ton of coil. It's about controlling supply inside a tariff wall, qualifying for defense and infrastructure contracts that foreign steel can't touch, and holding a position that a government has already decided is too important to let fail. That's a different bet than the ranch or the mall. Nobody buys a mill for the view. Now the honest math, good year versus bad year, using the same company. In the first quarter of 2025, Nucor's net earnings were $156 million. 1 year later, in the first quarter of 2026, with hot-rolled coil prices recovering toward $1,100 a ton and scrap costs holding steady, that same company posted net earnings of $743 million, nearly a 5-fold increase, on sales that rose only about 21%. Same mills, same workers, same furnaces. The entire difference came from a few $100s of spread per ton, multiplied across millions of tons, moving in a direction the company itself didn't control. That's the business. The furnace glows the same color whether you're making money or bleeding it. The only thing that changes is a price set somewhere you'll never see, by someone you'll never meet.